Laura. You already started to put into the discussion some notions that later Sid will deal with, and that is, of course, the genocide and its impact on those issues. But let's first open the floor for a few comments and questions.
I'm struck by the recurring theme of a one pole in the Jewish conversation that's encapsulated in Rivka's paper in terms of the non-territorial sort of project of creating a non-territorial and yet non-individual form of human rights, always sort of sternly reproached from one side by the liberal individualists and from the other side from the sovereign ethno-nationalists. That again and again there are sort of moments when it doesn't only seem possible that individual rights will be enforceable, but that a critique of sovereignty, right, a sort of deeper pluralism, that's sort of one strand in the Jewish conversation, which is particularly vivid, is the idea that the answer is not a Jewish sovereign state. The answer is a world without sort of singular sovereignties, and that sort of is, I take it, what you see as most utopian and gripping in the displaced persons camp. It's also sort of what's gripping in the pre-statehood debates within Zionism and Jewish nationalism, and it's what seems to be not quite on the agenda outside the displaced persons camps in the Jewish advocates sort of world. The World Jewish Congress doesn't seem to have a critique of sovereignty, except in the sense that sovereigns shouldn't be immune from the intervention of international bodies on behalf of individuals. But the more utopian project in that fluid moment of constructing sort of, it's again and again, it happens again in the in the independence movements. Again, there are sort of in the anti-colonial movements certain figures who say what we want in the way of independence, not Jews any longer, right, but other groups who are overthrowing empires, is instead of replacing the empires with nation states, replace the empires with better federations. The sort of a kind of deeply federated vision of the governance of territory, right, seems, to me at least, the most sort of inspiring element, and also the sort of most elusive one.
Thank you.
Thank you all for the papers. I want to ask Laura a question. I'm really happy that you're pressing on the 1940s because despite what you said, I think there's so much there. The most striking thing about your paper was the end in which you said something to the effect of the world was not ready. And that, from a historian's perspective, that makes me raise my eyebrows, right? To say the world wasn't ready, because it implies that possibility was, intrinsic and just had to be expressed at a certain point when the context came together. So I wanted to press you on that and ask about that notion that the world was not ready for these ideas of it, or there was a short-lived moment, and say whether we could narrate it differently and still give an agency to the World Jewish Congress at that moment, but not have them be sort of storming the barricades of sovereignty only to be shot down. But I wondered what you would say would be another way to narrate that, to see it as perhaps, not that the world isn't ready, but that the world doesn't want it, and maybe they don't want everything they claimed at that time. Given that they're such complicated people, as you've shown us, and I'm interested in this too, in their commitment to statehood, in their zeal to define themselves publicly and to say the world must recognize Jewish nationhood, and they're almost sometimes at cross purposes themselves. So I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Let's take two more comments, Leora and Carol, and then we'll...
I'd like to chime in with that about the world not being ready in 45. Minority rights were in very bad odor in 1945 because of what the Germans had done. And also the Polish and Czech governments in exile said they would never accept, they still remembered when it happened that they would never accept any kind of regulation at all. And of course the Soviets were not at all interested in it. And the UN discussed it, whether it was whether the treaties would still be valid, in fact. And I think the comment was, we want to free ourselves from minority rights and from minorities and from this kind of interference. But it does have an afterlife after the end of the Cold War. For 50 years. I mean, even the European Court of Human Rights throws out minority cases. And then suddenly we roll out this, Copenhagen, Vienna, it's come back. So, maybe losers do have winners. I'd like to ask Miriam to talk about something else. Involuntary or voluntary passports, the whole issue of quotas in the interwar period, which gets introduced.
Of what?
Quotas. Immigration restriction that my country introduces and is informal also in places like Australia. That your passport becomes your fate. And this becomes even more important with refugees in the 1930s and 40s till the United States dumps this idea of quotas. That, if you're born in Poznan, but it was German, but now it's Polish, which quota do you fall under? And if you don't fall under anything, but you must fall under something in terms of American law. Yeah, which is, I guess, part of your involuntary, can I give this thing up, but I can't.
Leora, last one for now, and maybe we'll have time for another round later on.
Okay, so this is a question to all three of you. First, thank you. I think it was a very interesting panel. But it raised for me one question. It seems that all three lectures discuss maybe Europe a little less, but it discussed the inability of Jews to adjust themselves to the international law system of the time, or to the definitions that it offers at the time. And their struggle is to move it to fit their experience or their expectations or their needs. So in a way, we heard about the statelessness, whether they should go back to the country of origin, or can we imagine an international law that doesn't force one to go back to the nation of origin? Or we heard from Rivka about the idea of non-territorial criminal court system that is based on group identity. And we heard with Laura about the idea of crimes against the Jews as opposed to genocide or to crimes against humanity. And there is a long list of things that can the Jews, can there be prosecutors that are not state prosecutors, and so forth. So what I was asking all of you to reflect is whether it's all what happened in the long run to these ideas. Do you see them having any fruits later on in international law, or whether, and maybe this connects to you, whether it was first forgotten, objected to? So I'm looking at the contribution of these kinds of ideas that come out from the specificity of the Jewish experience, but what is the impact, if you see it all, on international law of these kinds of ideas?
Let's go now the other way around. So Lara, you will be the first.
So the first question to James Loeffler. So I certainly didn't want to kvetch about the world not being ready, but it's more.
When's it going to happen?
Oh, there is this oy Gewalt moment in this in this lobby effort at the time, and I think there is. It's true. There's more contradiction inside the World Jewish Congress than I dared to present here. Much more, and of course they are all from East Central Europe. and, mostly, and they have arguments and they don't agree with it. I mean, there's memorandum after memorandum and memorandum on the memorandum of the memorandum, and so there's comments on comment on comment. So there's a lot of confusion. But I think, they are lobbyists and they're trying many remedies for the problem. And so one is, of course, trying to be a non-state actor in an international law context, which doesn't work. And in a sense, it reinforces the statehood idea that basically you need a state in order to be part of international law, obviously. And then we can say, yes, the Eichmann trial is basically, and that connects to Leora's question, basically that Leora, that's what perhaps a long-term result of these ideas that were around, that basically Jews need a state in order to be part of the international community in a sense, but then they have the sovereignty to actually deal with the murderers of Jews themselves, and they don't necessarily have to deal with crimes against humanity, although they also deal with it, but also with a specific category of crimes against Jews. But then, I think that there's a lot of, as far as the World Jewish Congress in the late 40s is concerned, they are basically trying to fight at all fronts. And there's some contradiction in the concept of basically wanting to become a nation state as everybody else, and at the same time lobbying against or trying to basically curtail the power of the nation state in order to protect the minorities that don't belong really into the nation state. So there's a contradiction in that too. And then in terms of your question, Carol, I think what strikes me really in the human rights discourse there is the how present the minority rights issues are, and basically minority rights are unpopular and dead, but nevertheless the World Jewish Congress kind of tries to infuse as much as minority rights discourse as possible. And doesn't get very far with it. I mean, it's just a huge disappointment, but they try very hard. And when you compare the vocabulary used in these memoranda, it's very striking how much minority right protection talk there actually is under the label of human rights, which I find fascinating. It's really an afterlife of the minority rights issue, I think.
What about the whole issue of population exchange, though? Because this is part of the discussion as well. Did you get into that? Shechtman and this idea that maybe the whole solution is, which I guess gets into the early life of Israel as well. What do you do with minorities? I mean, the going back to 1922, 23, that maybe there is no solution except for change. Minorities are gone, and we expect them.
I didn't come across that in particular in terms of the. Yes, there are certainly in the documents of the World Jewish Congress. I'm sure there's a lot about that, but in the specific memoranda that I read concerning the human rights issues, the population transfer is not really an issue, as far as I can say.
Thank you. Go to.
Thank you. I'm not sure that I can reply about the contribution of the non-territorial legal ideas about influencing the international law, but I can reflect on I'm not sure if this is a contribution, but more like influence of these ideas about the Israeli law, because if we look at the DP community, we see it was for a small group for a limited time, and in 1948 or 1950, this historical chapter ended, and the people ended up in Israel or in the United States. But I think that and there is of course a very definite divide between the diaspora or between the DP camps era and the establishment of the State of Israel. But I think that non-territorial legal idea of adjudicating, for example, Jews are suspected of collaboration with the Nazis, which was definitely non-territorial and idea, had made aliyah to Israel and has how you say it, blatant consequences in the Nazis and Nazi punishment law of the 1950. Not specifically in the words of the law, but in its spirit. And later on, you can see it in the legal proceedings, hearing the evidence. It was like the court of rehabilitation from the camp courts appeared in the court of the State of Israel. So I think that there is you can find some kind of influence from the legal ideas from the DP camps in the Israeli law. I'm not sure about the international law, but this is something to think about.
Okay, thank you for your comments and questions. It's not easy to answer briefly or immediately because I think those are the two questions that went to all of us or to me, I think are the really broad questions that we are addressing. The one is the involuntary citizenship or the quota, how is it connected to immigration laws, etc. So, and the other one, the trans-territorial belonging, as I would say, that is the outcome of the experience that we have of the Jews of not being able to fit into the nation-state system that they find in 45. But they answer to this inability with issuing, for example, I'll start with Liora Bilski's question first. They answered in my specific realm of what I work on with a law of return of Israel, which is, as I would say, still a trans-territorial law. It says citizenship does not need to be territorially bound, only for voting and for the army service, of course. But for all the other parts of being part of the collective, you can live anywhere in this world as long as you're Jewish. You're part of this nation state as an idea. So that's one of the things where I see they try to translate the experience of those DP years into the nation state they erected in 48, the Jewish collective of those years. The other issue is, of course, the question actually that also Laura mentioned with the short-lived moment. I would see those 10 years that I briefly look at as a very dense decade of playing around with really many parallel ideas of how to make this new system work. So I would say if we look from hindsight, we would say it's an inability of Jews maybe to fit in, but maybe it's not. Maybe they are just taking it serious, that it's a new start and that we could try different ways. In the end, it ends up with a national belonging, but for 10 years, I would say it's kind of up and down in different discussions, at least on the table. Okay, the quotas and immigration laws are important, of course, but for what I look at, I would say it's the prehistory, because it shows that in those years, it was very important to have the passport, the right passport, in order to fit into whatever quota. But then you see the Zionist, the Hachshara movement, for example, trying to build the Zionist citizen in order to get an immigration visa for Palestine from the British. It was also kind of a proto-citizenship building already, no matter what passport you had, in order to fit into a quota. But for my part, for what I look at, I would say it's the question of can I give it up or not, because I'm endangering myself by giving up something because I wouldn't fit into a quota anymore. It doesn't relate to the years I look at, because when I look at the time when statelessness is something that at least saves you from being deported to somewhere where you don't want to go. And that's the big difference, that in the years the refugees are in Eastern Europe and cannot leave, that right doesn't exist yet. Did I answer your question? You look skeptical.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to all of the speakers. Thank you, and we will meet here again at 2:30, right, for the post-war panel.
We'll meet.
Okay, 3. Sorry.
One of the presenters.
A longer break. 3 o'clock. We'll be here for the post-war.
Get this contract.